In everyone's life, events occur that seem random, but are actually the result of deep, unconscious processes. The encounters we experience don't just happen. They reflect what we carry within us, our unresolved conflicts and inner aspirations. This is the law of resonance in action, attracting people and situations that correspond to our internal state, whether conscious or not. Even complex and painful relationships carry important messages that our ego may ignore but are necessary for the growth and development of the soul. Carl Jung argued that the most significant encounters are predetermined by the soul even before people meet physically. Consider what your relationships say about you. The upcoming exploration will help understand why certain connections arise, why certain scenarios repeat, and how seemingly random encounters are actually a reflection of our psyche. It's important to watch to the end to understand how the law of resonance works in relationships and to stop. Considering as coincidence what is the language of the unconscious. Each of us has probably experienced something similar. Life flows along until someone new suddenly appears. A chance glance in a cafe, a conversation on the subway, a mistaken message, and everything changes. It seems like chance, but such encounters that change the course of our lives defy logic, are not planned, and do not depend on external control. There is a feeling that it was all predetermined, that this presence was attracted without conscious intention, as if an invisible thread connects two people who had lived in different worlds before. According to the eminent psychologist Carl Jung, some fateful connections originate long before we realize their significance and define them. And these are not just beautiful metaphors, but a cornerstone of his theory of the unconscious. Jung argued that behind the veil of everyday events lies a certain deep force, a symbolic intelligence that guides us along a path strewn with experiences necessary for healing, transformation, and understanding the truth. In this concept, there is no room for chance. What we used to consider a simple coincidence is actually an encrypted message, a language in which the unconscious speaks to us. Fate is nothing more than a dance between the unconscious and the external world, where each step is dictated by invisible threads of resonance. This resonance, which escapes logic and rational explanation, manifests itself in repeating life scenarios, in encounters with people who seem to reflect our own traits, in connections, even fleeting, that leave an indelible mark on the soul. The appearance in a person's life of someone capable of turning everything upside down, whether for good or for chaos, is never accidental. Often such a person carries the key to solving a problem that has long remained unresolved. In other cases, they embody something not yet realized in oneself. They can act as a mirror, reflecting our virtues and shortcomings, a trigger, launching deep processes, a messenger, conveying important information, or even a bridge, connecting us with new opportunities. But they are never neutral. Their appearance is always filled with meaning and significance. The deep I, the innermost core of the human psyche, like a magnet, attracts fateful encounters, guided by knowledge inaccessible to the ego. It acts through the language of symbols, mysterious dreams, and amazing synchronicities, often using another person as a mirror, reflecting aspects of our personality hidden from us. Carefully examining one's life path, one can notice that the necessary people arise at the most unexpected moments, not always distinguished by gentleness or sensitivity, but invariably appearing exactly at the right hour. The soul flawlessly recognizes a kindred spirit long before the mind learns the name, and then the natural course of life changes its direction. Everything that enters our lives is in harmony with our inner vibrations. This is the essence of the law of psychic resonance. The idea that our external experiences, especially encounters with other people, are a reflection of the internal states of our psyche. It's not just about energy in an esoteric sense, but also about the emotional, symbolic, and unconscious vibrations emanating from the depths of our being. We attract what vibrates at the same psychic frequency as our inner self, including our wounds, shortcomings, unrealized desires, unresolved traumas, and repressed parts of ourselves. In the intricate fabric of human relationships, each individual appears as a kind of emotional reflection, mirroring aspects of personality not yet realized or accepted by the person themselves. It is this phenomenon that explains why some people are able to touch the deepest chords of the soul, while others remain only fleeting fellow travelers on the life path. For this reason, some relationships develop smoothly and harmoniously, while others are characterized by intensity and demandingness. Even if it's not immediately obvious, the other person serves as a reflection of one's inner world, a kind of projection of the unconscious. This vibration, though invisible and hard to measure, manifests as symbols, patterns, and recurring situations. The language of the unconscious, unlike linear thinking, is symbolic and metaphorical. The world around us becomes a stage where these deep processes play out. Recurring situations, similar types of people, familiar names, glances, and even feelings of déjà vu, all of these can be attempts by the unconscious to convey important information. There's something here that needs to be recognized. Each person's psychic field isn't neutral. It constantly emits signals, even in moments of silence. These signals, perceived at an unconscious level, attract people who vibrate on similar frequencies or who can awaken dormant aspects of the personality that need to be expressed. Thus, a person doesn't always attract what they desire, but rather what they avoid. However, this doesn't happen as a punishment, but due to vibrational correspondence, as the subconscious strives for wholeness and harmony, even if the path to this lies through confrontation with undesirable aspects. The law of attraction sheds light on why certain connections between people seem predetermined, as if an invisible force pulls them together, even when the mind desperately resists. This mysterious attraction, defying logic, is rooted in the emotional sphere where the deepest and most transformative experiences occur. At this level of the subconscious, dramas unfold that are beyond rational analysis. The encounters that happen in a person's life aren't accidental. In relationships that hold special significance, there's a deep meaning hidden, often not immediately apparent. Even in the most difficult and painful clashes, there's a certain accuracy, a hidden lesson. The universe surrounding a person isn't something external and separate from them. On the contrary, it serves as a mirror, reflecting their inner world with all its complexity and contradictions. Some meetings bring a sense of completion and harmony, while others, on the contrary, cause internal conflict and force one to face their fears. But in almost every significant encounter, there's a moment of revelation, as if someone invisible touches the most cherished and vulnerable part of the soul, the one that a person usually hides from prying eyes. This isn't just a coincidence, but a manifestation of psychic complementarity, when subconscious needs and unresolved conflicts attract certain people into a person's life. Carl Jung, the renowned Swiss psychiatrist and philosopher, emphasized the limitations of the human ego. The ego shapes personality based on conscious choices and preferences, determining who a person wants to appear to be, what they're willing to show the world, and what they consider acceptable for themselves. However, everything that has been rejected and suppressed due to fear, shame, or ingrained habits doesn't disappear without a trace. It goes into the unconscious, and it's this repressed content of the subconscious that a person, without realizing it, seeks to attract into their life. Striving for inner harmony, the human mind seeks a balance that eludes the ego's understanding and achieves it by attracting what's missing for wholeness. A rational person admires intuition, while a control enthusiast inevitably encounters manifestations of spontaneity, and a practical realist finds common ground with a dreamer. There's no accident in this, because behind what's happening is the unconscious, striving to point out missed opportunities and forgotten aspects of the personality. Meetings with opposites rarely go smoothly, often generating disagreements, internal resistance, and even rejection. The reason lies in the fact that the other person reflects those qualities that the individual doesn't accept in themselves, but which must be integrated to achieve harmony. Attraction arises precisely because of the contrast, in which there's enormous potential for personal growth. Relationships with opposites become a kind of invitation to expand the boundaries of one's own self. Fate brings together people who can destroy familiar patterns, question established beliefs, and bring chaos into emotional logic. At first glance, it may seem that they belong to completely different worlds. However, over time it becomes clear that it's precisely these differences that open new horizons, lead out of the comfort zone, and create space for the development of a fuller and more multifaceted personality. Such meetings aren't random errors on the path of life, but predetermined encounters of souls striving not for convenience, but for fullness and integrity. In Jungian psychology, individuation is a dynamic process of integrating repressed aspects of the personality and expanding consciousness through accepting the other as an integral part of self-knowledge. Attraction to someone drastically different from us becomes an opportunity for self-analysis. What qualities does this person reflect? What unrealized aspirations do they awaken? What aspects of our personality have we been hesitant to develop? Encountering an opposite is not a challenge, but rather a reminder of the potential hidden within us. Often, love blossoms when the soul intuitively senses what the mind cannot yet grasp. However, not every strong attraction signifies a genuine connection. Sometimes, what feels like a kindred spirit is merely a reflection of internal conflicts and unresolved issues. Discerning true attraction from projection is one of the most complex tasks on the path to self-discovery. When someone who evokes an inexplicable attraction enters our lives, there's a temptation to see it as a sign of destiny. But often it's simply a manifestation of the projection mechanism, where we see not the other person's true essence, but a reflection of our own unconscious desires, emotional needs, and idealized images. Psychological projection is a powerful force, akin to a deafening explosion, a swift impulse capable of intoxicating and drawing one into its vortex with dizzying speed. When someone becomes the object of projection, an illusory sense of complete understanding and deep connection arises, as if one has encountered a soulmate capable of reading minds without words. However, in reality, the dialogue is not with a real person, but with a reflection of one's own activated self. Intuition, on the other hand, unfolds at a different pace. Its voice is quiet and delicate, almost shy. Genuine intuition is devoid of haste and anxiety. It offers a sense of calm recognition. There's no need to prove one's worth or hold another person's attention. Interaction develops naturally and effortlessly, without striving for idealization. To draw a clear line between projection and intuition, it's helpful to ask oneself a key question. What exactly attracts me to this person? If the answer is filled with fantasies about rescue, relief from problems, or the acquisition of a missing element, then it's likely a projection. If the perception is more realistic, open and devoid of illusions, it may be a manifestation of intuition. Conscious perception serves as a reliable filter, activated only when there's enough courage to look into one's own emotional voids. A person who evokes a strong attraction often reflects a certain part of one's inner world. The question is whether this part is recognized consciously or simply used to fill an emotional void. Often, romantic stories begin in a world of illusions and idealizations, where each partner sees in the other only a reflection of their own hopes and desires. However, over time, when the veil lifts and the masks are removed, a moment of truth arrives which can bring disappointment, bitterness, and even anger. But with it comes long-awaited insight. The essence of the problem lies not in projection itself, as it's an integral part of human nature. The danger lies in becoming so engrossed in created fantasies that one loses touch with reality and fails to notice how the fictional image begins to diverge from the partner's true face. Not every meeting is predetermined by fate, but each can become a valuable lesson. Some people appear in our lives to point out areas where we still naively expect miracles and need rescuing. Others, on the contrary, remind us of our inner wholeness and self-sufficiency, urging us to realize that the source of strength lies within ourselves. The task for each of us is to learn to recognize the true nature of these connections, showing attention and awareness. One shouldn't blindly trust first impressions, as not all that glitters is gold. Behind the mask of a kindred spirit may lie only an echo of long-forgotten desires that persistently demand attention and release. There are also people who evoke a storm of negative emotions: anger, envy, irritation, instant dislike. While the natural impulse in such situations is to distance oneself, condemn, or deny, it's worth remembering that there's more to these strong reactions. They serve as signals indicating that our shadow side of personality has been touched and requires closer attention. In Carl Jung's analytical psychology, the concept of the shadow goes far beyond simple evil. It represents the totality of personality aspects that the individual refuses to acknowledge as their own. The shadow encompasses character traits, suppressed desires, uncontrolled impulses, and deeply hidden emotions banished from conscious self-perception. However, these elements do not disappear. Instead, they persist, lurking in the depths of the subconscious and influencing human behavior. One of the most common ways the shadow manifests is through interpersonal relationships. People are often inclined to reject in others the qualities they have failed to accept in themselves. For instance, the arrogant behavior of those around us can be irritating because it serves as a reminder of suppressed vanity that the individual does not allow themselves to exhibit. Instability in other people can be disturbing, as it activates a sense of hidden fragility that one tries to ignore within oneself. Selfish actions of others can be provoking because they reflect one's own desire to set boundaries and protect their interests, which the individual hesitates to realize. Thus, what evokes strong emotions in relation to other people speaks more about the observer than the observed. This does not mean that any behavior deserves justification or that one must tolerate everything. However, before automatically reacting to the actions of others, it is helpful to consider the reasons for such a strong emotional reaction and what feelings it evokes. Often, the true cause of discomfort lies deeper than it seems at first glance. The shadow can manifest in various forms such as criticism, rivalry, or envy. The natural impulse in such situations is to distance oneself from the person causing these feelings. However, such detachment often reflects discomfort from encountering one's own shortcomings. It is much easier to point out the flaws of others than to engage in the complex task of integrating the unsightly aspects of one's personality. Carl Jung once remarked that suppressed aspects of personality tend to be projected onto others, forming seemingly predestined life scenarios. This thought, at first glance, may seem harsh, but it opens the way to liberation from the vicious cycle of repetitions. Instead of feeling like a victim of circumstances, one gains the opportunity to consciously look at those qualities in others that evoke the strongest reaction and use this as a stimulus for self-knowledge. Paradoxically, it is the most complex and uncomfortable relationships that can become the most valuable source of lessons. It's not about their pleasantness or positivity, but about the ability to identify hidden sides of the personality. Only what comes to the surface of consciousness can be rethought, healed, and integrated. There is no need to sympathize with everyone, but understanding the reasons why certain people have such a strong impact is key to personal growth. Conflicting situations are not always related to external factors. Often they reflect an internal struggle with unrecognized parts of oneself, hiding behind a mask of criticism and condemnation. It may seem to a person that they control their relationships, that they have learned from the past and become different, but the unconscious attraction repeatedly leads to the same types of people, the same disappointments, and the same inner emptiness. A persistent streak of failures is not just a coincidence, but a pattern rooted in the depths of the unconscious. Underlying motives guide a person, repeatedly reproducing scenarios that once left an indelible mark on their soul. Events experienced in childhood, in the first romantic relationships, moments when a person felt devastated, have a particularly strong influence. The unconscious, with maniacal precision, recreates situations reminiscent of past traumas, not out of sadistic motives, but in the hope that the unresolved problem will finally be recognized, understood, and overcome. A person can convince themselves otherwise, rationalize their actions, make promises that this time everything will be different. However, until the painful core of the trauma is healed, it will determine their choices, distort their perception of reality, force them to see love where in reality there is only a desperate need to heal old wounds, to heal rejection, to fulfill an unfulfilled desire, to achieve recognition. Thus, a person falls into a vicious circle, gets involved in relationships with emotionally cold partners, continues to endure pain and suffering, feels lonely and abandoned even in the presence of loved ones. And all this is not because they are masochistically striving for suffering, but because, on a subconscious level, they are trying to find a way out of a situation that was never resolved in the past. Repeating a traumatic experience is a way in which the unconscious seeks to complete an interrupted process, as if replaying the scene and hoping for a favorable outcome. But alas, healing is not achieved by putting pressure on external circumstances. True liberation comes only through deep self-analysis, through the realization of exactly which emotional needs require care and attention. It is not about predestination, but about ingrained behavioral patterns that, once recognized, can be transformed. The key is to honestly look at recurring scenarios. Why does a person repeatedly enter into relationships with unavailable partners, settle for less than they deserve, and mistake turbulent emotions for true love? Awareness of these patterns is not a magic wand, but it creates a real opportunity to break the vicious cycle, opening up space for new, more mature decisions that correspond to one's true personality, not old emotional wounds. A person is not doomed to eternally follow their habitual patterns, but to gain freedom, it is necessary to recognize that for a long time, these patterns determine their choices. Only when this awareness becomes crystal clear will there be a chance to create a new story where relationships are not echoes of the past, but are built on respect for oneself today. It is important to understand that not every connection is meant to fill some missing part. Some relationships arise to remind us of our inner wholeness. These are unions based not on deficiency, but on self-sufficiency, not fueling illusions and not filling a void, but simply sharing space. It is in this that their deep healing power lies. Relationships that heal the soul are not always the most passionate or romantic. These are the connections in which a person feels safe, remaining themselves without having to play any roles. There is room for sincere attention, respect for silence, and acceptance of all, even the most vulnerable, aspects of personality. In such relationships, there is no desire to fix, but rather to accompany the person on their path to recovery. Such connections awaken what Carl Jung called the healer archetype, an internal pattern that is activated in the presence of someone who listens attentively without judgment, accepts without intending to change, and sees pain without fear. Being around such a person is like finding a place where you can finally breathe freely. However, even these relationships are not without challenges, because true healing grows not from a comfort zone, but from conscious presence. Sometimes another person can point out how far an individual has drifted from themselves, touching on hidden aspects of personality, not to cause pain, but to reveal them. It is this naked truth, supported by tenderness, that begins to organize what has been broken. Often people expect someone to come and fill their shortcomings, but in healing relationships, there is no promise of filling the void. Instead, they offer a mirror, support, and truth. While this may seem less tangible, it is actually much more powerful, as it returns to the person the autonomy that deficiency-based relationships usually take away. Love that has healing power does not promise salvation, but reminds us of a person's ability to recover. It strengthens them, allowing them to move forward with greater awareness, not carrying them on their back, but supporting them by the hand, without binding them. Love connections are not always marked with the seal of eternity. Some are fleeting, like the seasons, bestowing warmth and contributing to inner growth before disappearing from life. However, their legacy is surprisingly durable. They clearly demonstrate that it is possible to establish a deep connection with another person without dissolving in them or losing one's own identity. Such relationships arise not to fill a gaping void within, but to remind us of the richness of the inner world, of the potential and resources that may have been forgotten in the hustle and bustle of days. From this resurrected memory comes healing, devoid of turbulent passions and painful dependence, based on simple but profound presence. Every interaction with another person awakens something new in the depths of the soul. It could be a dormant strength, an old, unhealed wound, or an unexpected role that one didn't even suspect existed. Such metamorphoses occur because each person is not just an individual, but also a kind of activator of archetypes. In Carl Jung's terminology, archetypes are universal structures rooted in the collective unconscious of humanity. They represent stable patterns of behavior, symbolic images, and deep emotions that each of us carries. When a new person enters life, they can awaken a dormant hero, a caring guardian, a rebellious rebel, a suffering victim, a wise advisor, or a wounded child. This awakening almost never happens on a conscious level, unfolding in the depths of the subconscious. At the very beginning of a relationship, a vague but strong feeling often arises, the need to protect someone, or conversely, the desire to be protected. A person may feel destined to be a guide or experience the opportunity to show weakness for the first time. Sometimes the attraction is not so much to the person themselves, but to the role they awaken in us. This explains the intensity of some connections as they confront us with hidden corners of our own self. It's important to note that these archetypal roles are not static. They change as the relationship develops. The same person can first elevate us to the heavens and then, shortly after, plunge us into despair. This doesn't necessarily indicate that the connection is false, but rather that it has touched different levels of our being. The person acts as a spark, but the flame it ignites belongs to us. Often there is a substitution of concepts, and this encounter with internal images is mistakenly taken for love. When entering into a relationship, we interact not only with another person, but also with what they awaken in us, with what they symbolize and emotionally represent. This is why some encounters have such a profound impact, even if they are brief. They awaken a part of the soul that we couldn't previously recognize. Once awakened, this part doesn't go back to sleep. It changes our perception of the world, our way of interacting with others, and the very essence of our existence. Encounters with other people are an integral part of personal growth, because it is through them that a person gradually discovers the diversity of internal voices. An individual is not only their current self, but also their potential, everything they can become, and the presence of another person can stimulate this revelation. Meetings are not accidental. People are living reflections of internal fragments, and each of them provides a chance to become more whole, conscious, and sincere with oneself. Not every love is destined for eternity. Some encounters come to destroy, and there is value in that too. There are connections that shouldn't last long, but are meant to transform. They burst in like a flame, destroying everything outdated and unnecessary, leaving behind silence, emptiness, and longing, but also space for something new. These intense connections, which seem to deprive us of support, are often an act of self-preservation, initiating necessary destruction. The ego strives for permanence and security, but the soul yearns for truth and movement. And when stagnation sets in, love can burst in like a shock, like a kind of emotional alchemy that turns everything inside out. A person may feel that they have lost someone, but in reality, they have lost a previous version of themselves, the part that no longer corresponded to their development, but which they couldn't let go of on their own. This is the role of some encounters. To shake things up in order to liberate, not because the other person wanted it, but because the energy of this connection carried such a mission. The pain associated with the end of a love relationship doesn't necessarily indicate the meaninglessness of the experienced feeling. Rather, it may serve as confirmation that love has fulfilled its mission, achieved its goal. It has revealed hidden aspects of the personality, ruthlessly exposed vulnerable, dependent, and idealized sides, destroyed illusory perceptions to make room for something new. It's not easy to accept that some romantic stories don't end with a traditional happy ending. However, perhaps the true happy ending lies elsewhere, in the clarity gained, in the manifested strength of spirit, in the expanded consciousness. Not every loss is an ending. Some of them are a beginning disguised as painful experiences. Carl Jung viewed such separations as an integral part of the individual path of development. An emotional crisis can be a starting point for internal restructuring. When love collapses, it exposes what was poorly fitted, thereby preparing the ground for something more authentic, conscious, and complete. At times, people love so much that they unwittingly take on the role of those who cause pain, push out of the comfort zone, lead away from the false path, and push towards rebirth. And although it's painful, it's also a manifestation of love, a kind of catalyst for personal growth and spiritual awakening. Encounters that seem accidental to us are actually accurate hits on the target with deep meaning. Gaining emotional maturity, a person realizes that the destruction of the old is necessary for the creation of something more authentic and durable. Some people enter our lives only for a short moment, not staying forever and not becoming part of everyday life, but even in that time, they manage to leave an indelible mark. Their role may be to open new doors for us, to touch dormant corners of our soul. After their departure, there remains a space that at first seems like a frightening silence, but over time turns into a valuable lesson. Not every relationship is destined to last forever. Some are just brief stops, intense and precise cycles. The human soul intuitively understands that certain people are only needed up to a certain point. Extending such a relationship beyond that point would be an artificial holding on to something that has already exhausted itself. The ego clings to the past, while the soul wisely accepts the inevitable and lets go. Accepting the completion of a cycle does not mean diminishing its value. On the contrary, it is a way to honor the experience without futilely trying to prolong it. It is important to remember that everyone who has appeared in our lives has played their role, and the end of a relationship is a natural stage of development, not a tragedy. From the depths of the experience, forgiveness is born. An act not of justifying what has happened, but of genuine liberation from the shackles of the past. By forgiving, a person seems to sever the invisible thread that holds them in the embrace of past events. The past is not erased from memory, but it no longer weighs on them with an unbearable burden. Forgiveness is not an indulgence of mistakes or a consignment to oblivion of the pain experienced, but a conscious decision to stop feeding the poison that poisons the soul. It is an acknowledgement that the other person acted to the best of their understanding and that the forgiver is not perfect either. True forgiveness is not directed outward, but inward towards achieving inner peace. Gratitude is not about embellishing reality, but about honestly acknowledging what has happened. It is a look into the past with the understanding that even through the haze of pain, the seeds of something new sprouted, something in the soul awakened and grew stronger, even at the cost of tears and silence. Some people teach lessons of love and tenderness, others lessons of absence and loss, but each of them, in one way or another, leaves their mark on the path of life. Life is a series of cycles where each new relationship brings new lessons. Some are an example of true love, others are the opposite. Some heal emotional wounds, others inflict new ones, but all of them, without exception, shape the personality. And when a person learns to be grateful even for those encounters that caused pain, an inner transformation occurs. Anger gives way to humility, attachments weaken, and the heart opens up to new opportunities. Not every phenomenon has to be immortalized to have significance. Sometimes it is enough to gratefully state, "Thank you for being in my life, even if our paths have diverged," and continue on your way with renewed lightness, clarity, and inner harmony. Deep down, there is a growing understanding that every event and every encounter occurs at a strictly defined moment and ends when the necessary life lesson has been learned. Ultimately, there is hardly room for chance in the fabric of existence. The people who appear on our horizon, linger, or disappear from it invariably resonate with the strings that are already vibrating in our soul. Some come with gentleness and humility, others like a storm, turning everything upside down. Some raise us to the top, while others, on the contrary, shatter us into fragments. But each of them leaves their unique imprint, transforming something within us. A person attracts to themselves exactly the experiences they need to have, even if they cause pain, seem unfair, or lack any meaning. The unconscious mind has its own ways, incomprehensible to logic, and often only when the dust of passion settles, clarity comes, pain becomes a sign, chaos becomes part of history, and the person met becomes a reflection of ourselves. Each meeting performs its own special function, awakens, highlights hidden aspects, teaches, provokes, heals, or destroys, sometimes all at once. Accepting this continuous movement is a sure sign of inner maturity. After all, when we stop perceiving people as a reward or punishment and begin to see them as elements of our inner formation, the very essence of the narrative changes. It moves away from drama and gains awareness. It is not about establishing strict control over those entering and leaving life, but about being able to see a valuable lesson in every fleeting appearance. It is important to be able to integrate the experience gained, let go of what has lost its relevance, and gratefully accept what is still in the process of becoming. The point is not to avoid painful experiences, but to fill them with meaning. On this path, a person discovers a reflection of their own traits in the eyes of other people, sees themselves in the euphoria of emerging relationships, in the throes of separation, in the power of projections, and in the peace of the present moment. They realize that not every relationship is destined to last forever, but each one is capable of teaching an important lesson. Even those relationships that seemed like a loss actually turn out to be a stepping stone to a more perfect version of themselves. The subconscious responds to touch, the soul recognizes a kindred spirit even before a name is spoken, and everything that seemed like chance ultimately turns out to be a long-awaited encounter with those parts of oneself that yearned to be seen, understood, and accepted. Meetings are never accidental. Each person becomes a bridge between who you were and who you can become. Every story leaves a mark, not as a scar, but as a roadmap. Looking back on the journey, one can quietly and joyfully state, it was worth it. Not because everything turned out perfectly, but because something authentic was revealed. Ultimately, every encounter turned out to be what it was meant to be, a door opened